Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you can see, I have with me Commodore Anil Singh, Vice President of the Indian Maritime Foundation and an expert in India's security concerns. Sir, thank you so much for joining me today for this topic, which is actually brewed up quite hard after the Ukraine conflict and the demand for India to take a stand with regards to defense procurement and self-reliance in the defense industry.
Well, thank you, Aadi. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's always a pleasure to be talking to you on various subjects, particularly in my case related to the maritime domain and associated with defense procurement, particularly because I have been associated with defense procurement issues in many capacities, both when I was in uniform and now when I'm out of uniform as well. So thank you for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure, sir. Sir, I'd like to ask you just for a baseline, because see, defense procurement is not an easy subject to understand for a layman. It is a very, very specialized field. I'm sure there's a huge amount of study that is done. I'd like you to just give us a baseline how this process is actually conducted, sir.
Well, defense procurements are basically of two kinds. I'll come down to the basics. One is, of course, the capital procurement, which is brand new equipment and modernization. And the other is revenue procurement, which is spare parts, undergoing repairs of existing equipment, minor upgrades. That comes under revenue procurement. So the defense budget is divided into capital budget and the revenue budget. And all those three services project their likely requirements for the forthcoming year, which is known as the budgetary estimates. Based on that, the government then decides how much can they spare, how much money is there in the kitty, and what are the requirements of the three services, which is then sort of the allocation is done accordingly. Now, this is based not on an annual basis. There is something called a long-term integrated prospective plan of all three services, which covers a 15-year period. And the LTIPP, as it is called, is the classified document. There is an unclassified version of that also called the Technology Perspective and Capability Roadmap, TPCR, which is on the MOD website. So, based on this 15-year plan, we develop a 5-year plan. The 5-year plan is generally run concurrent with the national 5-year plans, so that budgeting and all becomes more sort of streamlined. And thereafter, there are something called annual acquisition plan, AAPs, which run a 2-year cycle. So the overall perspective is there in the 15-year plan. It is accordingly modified depending on geopolitical situation, whatever may be the other requirements, into 5-year plans, which is further then refined into 2-year plans, where actual money is allocated for a particular equipment, which is definitely going to come in that 1 year or 2 years. And this also undergoes revision. So it's a very streamlined, very organized sort of a process. Budgeting is done on a conservative estimate. You assume that, well, or conservatively we expect, let's say, the GDP may go up in this year by, let's say, 5%. So you say, okay, then I'll get at least in a proportion to this thing. Let me increase. Let me also make my projections based on a budgetary increase of 5% in defense budget. So it's done in that sort of a format. So that is and then this is as far as the planning goes. Now, how does the actual process work? The actual process works is the services project the requirement. They prepare something called staff requirements. These staff requirements are then vetted by everybody. The money required is discussed. Then an RFI is sent out, a request for information out into the industry, saying that, look, this is the kind of stuff we want. Do you have this? If you don't, what do you have? You please let us know. Let's say we are talking hypothetically about a submarine, let's say. So we say, broadly, we want a submarine which looks something like this. Have you got something to offer? If you don't, what do you have? And based on what is available and what can be offered, this RFI may get modified. The Navy might say, okay, well, this capability now nobody's giving us, so maybe we need to modify that requirement a bit. This thereafter becomes then goes for the complete MOD approval process. There's something called a SCAP CC, SCAP CHC, and finally goes to the Defense Acquisition Council, which is chaired by the Defense Minister, who gives something called an AON, acceptance of necessity, which means that now it has been decided by the Ministry of Defense that this equipment is necessary for the armed forces or for the particular service. And a certain allocation is given there. So many thousand crores will be allocated to this project. And there is acceptance of necessity. Based on that, once that is approved, then the request for proposal is sent to the companies which meet the requirement. As per the RFI, you decide, okay, these are the firms who can probably deliver this equipment. So an RFP goes, request for proposal, with a defined timeline that this has to be responded to within this much time. Once the RFPs are received, the responses are received from all the companies. Those who are compliant, 100% compliant with that RFP, well, they are fine. Those who are not 100% compliant are disqualified. You have to be 100% compliant with the RFP. That is laid down in something called the Defense Acquisition Procedure, which used to earlier be called the Defense Procurement Procedure. So now, till 2016, it was called the DPP, but the 2020 version is called the DAP. Now, the DAP lists out, is a very comprehensive document, 600 odd pages, which gives you everything you need to know about defense procurement and how are you supposed to go about it. But no deviation from that is permitted, because, the whole purpose is that there should be standardization. You can't, because if you start allowing deviation, then all kinds of things start happening. So largely you can't deviate from that. So once the companies who have responded with 100% compliance submit their proposal, there's a technical evaluation committee that evaluates all these proposals and sees, does this guy actually meet all the requirements that we want? Once those companies who meet all the requirements are sort of finalized, then they're asked to show to trial their equipment that they're offering. That trial could happen in India. Certain equipment which can't be brought to India, the Navy or the MOD team goes abroad for the trial. And there's a trial directive which is written that we want to see the following things in the trial. Now, you have to show us this, otherwise we will not qualify you. And this is done on a no cost, no commitment basis. So we don't pay anything for it. It's the company. If they don't want to do a trial, so be it. Then they're out. So once this trial is over, the trial team then prepares its report. That trial report is then seen by something called staff evaluation takes place. That means within the staff of the MOD, this thing is completely scrutinized. What happened in the trial? What are the results that the trial showed? Do they match with the RFP? Was it realistic? Should it have been done in any other way? Etc. 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 Once the companies that qualify this technical evaluation, the staff evaluation, these are now the companies who are actually in the fray for that contract. The rest have probably fallen by the wayside for various reasons. There could be one, there could be 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number qualify. Now, at the time they submitted their bid, in response to the RFP, you're supposed to submit a technical bid and a commercial bid in sealed envelopes or sealed documents. The technical bid is open because that is a technical evaluation starts immediately after that, as I highlighted. The commercial bid, which is the cost, is still kept in a sealed envelope. It is not touched. Once the companies who have cleared everything, the complete staff evaluation, the trials, the technical evaluation, once that list is ready, then the companies are all called and they are present when the commercial bid is opened. The commercial bid is opened by the Ministry of Defence in the presence of all the companies, so that nobody can say there was foul play. And once the bid is read out in front of everybody, everybody's bid is read out. Usually the L1, the lowest bidder, is the one who gets selected, because by this stage, everybody who's in the game has got the right kind of equipment to offer as you wanted it, as the services wanted it. So there's no saying that he's better or I'm better, so I'm more expensive, he's cheaper because I'm better, because the armed forces have laid down the basic requirement. Everybody meets that. Now, if you've got something that is 100 times better, too bad. And because of that, you're more expensive, too bad. You were asked to give this equipment and for this price. So once the L1 is decided, then that is announced also that, so-and-so is the L1. There's a proper meeting where it is announced. Then starts the cost negotiation with that L1. So let's say I've said my one costs 100 rupees and I become L1. But MOD might still say, look, 100 is we still feel it could have been done for 97. Because we've got, now while all this is happening, the MOD is benchmarking this price by lots of parameters. They've got a very elaborate system of benchmarking the price. So after benchmarking, if they feel this thing should not have cost more than 96 and L1 is giving it for 100, then the negotiations will start. Why not 96? Why 100? And you could come to some conclusion if they can convince and say, okay, we are giving you this or that or whatever. So, or let's say foreign exchange rate has gone up or whatever it might be, or inflation has taken place in our country or whatever the reason might be, then sort of price is agreed to finally. The cost negotiation committee, it's called the CNC, arrives at a conclusion and a recommendation. And that becomes the price at which the contract will thereafter be signed. And then the contract is signed and the equipment. So it's a very elaborate procedure. It's all laid out in the DAP very specifically. No deviations from the DAP are permitted in terms of terms and conditions, whether it's commercial terms and conditions, whether it's legal terms and conditions, whether it's technical terms and conditions. Everything has to conform to the DAP. So that, in a nutshell, is how defense procurement happens in India. If that was the...
Oh, it's very interesting, sir. As a matter of fact, the rumor has it in the...
You're muted, I think. Yeah. No, I can hear you now.
That is interesting, sir. The rumor has it in the outside world that once India actually checks an equipment, you can blindly go for it because of the kind of rigorous checking that India does.
Yes.
Matter of fact, a lot of the Rafales that got ordered by a lot of the countries were on the basis that the French actually said, Indians have bought this, so the tests are pretty rock solid. So that's probably an advantage in some sort, but a disadvantage also in some sort. When we look at history, so we've been very sluggish with this procedure. Things take years and years and years. And of course, the elaborate procedure that you just told us obviously will take a long time for anybody to go through. My question to you is, some changes have happened in the past couple of years. May not be perfect, may not be a radical change, but what are they that has put us on the way of actually streamlining the process, if that's what you think, sir?
Yeah. You see, ever since the first defense procurement procedure came out in 2002, and that was the time when private industry was also allowed into defense manufacturing. That's how the DPP came out and a procedure was laid down. It has been refined almost every 2 years. There have been 7 or 8 iterations of the DPP. There's been 2002, 2005, 2006, 2008, 10, 12, 16, and now 20. So, and each one of them has tried to refine the previous one. With experience they've learned, and they've sort of tried to address all the issues that have come up at various times. So this document, which started being 140 or something pages, has now become a 640-page document. Because they've gotten into so much of explanation. What is the draft contract supposed to look like? Everything is there in there. So it's a very comprehensive document. What is indigenous content? How do you define indigenous content? What are offsets? How do you go about offsets? So there are lots of things. So the system, and there are timelines given in the DPP that, everything has to happen. The AON must happen in so many weeks, and then the RFP must happen in so many weeks, and the trial must happen in so many weeks, and going down the line, the contract must get signed in so many weeks. Now, this timeline has generally rarely been followed because, delays take place, trial may get delayed, the RFP may get delayed, so delays keep taking place. And rarely, if ever, for any major equipment have we been able to adhere to those timelines. Now, these timelines have been also modified with respective DPPs. Like they've said that an AON is only valid for 6 months after it is issued for the RFP to go out. Otherwise, the AON becomes invalid. They'll have to go again for an AON. Now, this is a double-edged thing. While it tries to speed up the RFP, if it doesn't happen and you go for another AON, you wasted another 6 months now because you've got to go back into that procedure all over again. So, attempts are being made to address it. The problem I have seen in the DPP is that not enough of an internal audit is done of one DPP to understand why things are not happening the way they should before a new DPP is issued. I mean, a very cursory sort of look is in, okay, this didn't work, doesn't matter, let's do it. But nobody has really sat down and said, why hasn't it worked? When we said this, we've been saying this over repeated DPPs and it's not working, there must be some reason for it. So things like that need to undergo more analysis, more discussion. And for the first time in DAP 2020, we were told all stakeholders were taken into consideration, foreign industry, Indian industry, before they finalized the DAP, which is a very positive step because so far it was a very closed door sort of a thing that one fine day industry was handed over a new DPP and said, here it is, whether you like it or not. This time they did actually discuss with foreign companies, they discussed with Indian companies. Of course, what they brought out was what suited them. That's a different matter. But at least industry was consulted, which is a positive development. And now, of course, they've set very ambitious targets for defense production and defense exports. By 2025, our defense production should be 25 billion US dollars, 25,000 billion US dollars, whatever, and exports of 5 billion US dollars, which is a substantial amount. So let's see if we can get there as fast as we would like to.
Absolutely, sir. And as a matter of fact, Aatmanirbharta is something which is being spoken about, and we also saw in the last some time there was a huge order of about 8,000 crores that was put out to the domestic defense industry for the use of the Indian Armed Forces. Some stuff seems to be happening, some is taking time, some is kind of stalled. My question to you is one thing, at a baseline level, so how do you think we are approaching this particular thing, considering the factor that people have not concentrated on this kind of a technology and this kind of development within India for a long time? There's not been a support structure and stuff like that. How do you think we are approaching, and what more do you think we should do? Related, is civil military fusion the answer, sir?
Firstly, I'll talk about the Aatmanirbharta aspect. It is very important that a country of India's size and stature is self-reliant in its defense production and its complete defense requirements. And I'm not saying indigenized. I'm not talking indigenization. I'm talking self-reliance. There's a difference between the two. Indigenization, as understood by many, is that every nut and bolt and pin should be made in India. that is not what should be happening. What is required to be made in India is what is critical. We can always order chips from outside. I mean, PCBs can come from somewhere, even if you're not doing all the PCB work ourselves. Semiconductors will come from somewhere else. They're not going to be made. India's not going to set up such a big industry for semiconductors. So that kind of component, sub-component level, there will be imports. But what is important is that tomorrow nobody should be able to hold you to ransom because you're dependent on that guy. We've had two bad experiences. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, its complete defense, its huge defense industrial complex just went down. Their factory shut down, actually shut down. They had to switch off power to a nuclear submarine base because they didn't have the money to pay the electricity bill. It was that bad. A nuclear submarine base. So the effect of that obviously was felt by India because India was very reliant on Russian equipment. It still is. It was at that time. I'm talking of 91, that time. And I was an XO of a submarine at that time, and we were fully operational. And so we could feel the pinch. Spares were not coming. We had to sort of make do with refurbishment instead of replacement. India was also passing through a very bad economic phase. If you remember, that was the time when the economy opened up. We had to sell gold to meet our foreign debt, our foreign loan repayments. So there was no money in the budget. It was a very tough time. So we overcame that. That was the first time in indigenization was really spoken about very seriously, that we need to become indigenous, or we need to promote indigenization. That means we should be able to get spares and all done in-house in India. Then 98, we did the nuclear test in May 98. The West imposed sanctions on us. And suddenly we found the Western origin equipment, we were not getting our stuff, what we wanted. All the countries, the supply chain totally dried up, which was Germany, US, Australia, UK, everybody in the West. That was the second rude shock we got. So indigenization and self-reliance is being promoted. In 2014, the Make in India vision was there. Defense was one of the 25 key sectors in that. But that sort of sense of urgency somehow did not happen. MOD brought out lots of policies to promote indigenization and to a lesser extent self-reliance. But we failed to walk the talk. Most of those policies, if you see them now, the same MOD which promulgated the policy was very tardy in its implementation. And so they sort of fell by the wayside progressively. And there was always that stuff did come from abroad. So indigenization was happening, self-reliance was happening, but not to the desired level. The Navy, in fact, was far ahead of the Army and the Air Force in this. Navy has done a lot of work. Even today, I think, in this ongoing Russia-Ukraine crisis, the Navy will be least affected amongst the three services. If tomorrow, let's say, the supply chain from Russia dries up, or the Ukrainian supply chain dries up, we get stuff from both these countries, the Navy will probably be the least affected of the three services. So, the importance of self-reliance, therefore, cannot be understated ever. We have to be self-reliant as a country. How we go about it is the question. Are we creating the right enabling environment to encourage industry to participate? Are our policies industry friendly? Now, when I say industry friendly, doesn't mean you go out of your way to help industry. You don't but you do create an enabling environment which encourages industry to want to make that investment, to be able to provide you what you need. This is not an automobile industry that 100,000 cars are being produced and people are buying them. This is a niche market. There's only one customer, the Ministry of Defense. And today, the Ministry of Defense needs something. Tomorrow, it may not need that thing. So why would this industry make this kind of huge investment for a small number, which may not be required after 10 years? So what is the incentive for him to do that? Defense exports is one. Most countries, if you see, their defense industry is sustained by their defense exports. France does not operate conventional submarines. They only operate nuclear submarines, but they still build conventional submarines for export. The Scorpion class, which we are now building in India. So across the world, defense exports is a very important thing. Firstly, for the revenue it generates to sustain your own industry, and secondly, for the diplomatic and military leverage it gives you in the country where you supplied equipment to. So India is now looking at defense exports in a big way. We've just signed a deal with the Philippines for BrahMos missile, $374 million deal, which is a very encouraging thing. BrahMos has been a great success story of indigenization. It was a joint venture with the Russians, but now it's a missile that's made in India, is being built in India, assembled in India. So there are success stories, but they are few and far between. We need to have far more success stories. That's the main thing. And for that, MOD has to create that enabling environment. That only a ministry can do. The policy Policy formulation has to be enabling. Policy implementation has to be enabling. That is the most important thing. And while the big industries like the Tatas or maybe the Mahindras or the L&Ts can absorb a few, setbacks now and then, this vast network of MSMEs that we have, who are doing brilliant work in research, in prototypes, in component, subcomponent, subsystem manufacture, they cannot afford to take a hurt. They don't have the financial bandwidth to be able to absorb losses. So they are the guys who need to be supported and told that, you are the backbone of our defense industry. We will support you, but you've got to deliver, and they will. So that is where the issue is actually to be understood, is that enabling environment has to, right down the chain, it has to go to the lowest level. You can't just say, okay, 5 big companies are getting support and for them to do whatever else they're doing. They're the only ones who can probably absorb a setback, but the small guys can't. And MSMEs are the sort of fountainbed of technological innovation in the country. Let's face it. Brilliant scientists. You go to Hyderabad, you go to Bangalore, you see outstanding work happening over there in these little setups they've got. Precision engineering. After all, look at your space program. It's a great success story. Your atomic energy program is a great success story. It's the same MSMEs who are supplying to them also, components and parts. The ecosystem there is very robust, but it needs to be supported. So that is basically this. And that brings me to this military-civil fusion thing which you were talking about, which China has taken up. Disruptive technologies. You see, the armed forces are always slow to change. Not because they don't have the bandwidth to understand change, but the armed forces are going into battle. They cannot be taking chances. Chalo, let's go try this technology. Chal gayi to theek hai. It doesn't matter if it fails. It has to be foolproof. It has to work. You have to win a war with it. There are no runners-up in war. You either win a war or you lose a war. So that is why the armed forces are always a little slower. There used to be a time when the armed forces led innovation. Internet is a US Air Force creation. Actually. Armed forces till the world wars were the ones who led in military in technological innovation. But now the world around has changed. So disruptive technologies, the armed forces have embraced in a big way. Artificial intelligence, blockchain, machine learning, big data for various applications. But it is being driven by the civilian world. China has fused the two. And so Chinese military innovation is happening almost at the same rate as the civilian innovation is happening. They have a strategy called the CMF, Civil Military Fusion Strategy. So we will be, and we should also not rush into it headlong. We've got to establish everything. So for example, let's say things like autonomous, UAVs or UUVs. I don't see them replacing military platforms, manned platforms. They will be great force multipliers, at least for the next 30 to 40 years. It's not something that overnight we're going to become an unmanned Navy or an unmanned Air Force, or any Air Force or Navy in the world is going to become unmanned. They're going to be very effective force multipliers, and that should be the endeavor now, because the battlefield is becoming very networked. It's a network-centric environment we're going to be operating in, where everything that you can put into it and connect up is going to make that difference in between the victor and the vanquished. So that's how I think I would look at it.
Oh, absolutely. So innovations are actually taking place as we speak, and the environment, especially with the war going on in Ukraine, tends to understand the growing requirements of defense and the kind of weapons that can be used. So transfer of technology, we've got technology for certain things from certain countries only, but the big stuff, even the West doesn't share it with us, no matter how much of a strategic partner they call us. How do you see the situation in terms of transfer of technology vis-a-vis where we stand today, sir?
See, transfer of technology is also a term which can be interpreted in many ways. We have something called a maintenance transfer of technology. We have a manufacturing transfer of technology. We have transfer of technology, as we understand it, that pure technology is coming, cutting edge technology. So, for example, manufacturing technology, we've done well in that. We're manufacturing submarines, we're manufacturing ships, we manufactured an aircraft carrier. We've designed it ourselves. So we've done well as far as manufacturing TOT goes. Foreign companies are willing to transfer manufacturing TOT to some extent. Similarly, maintenance TOT, the documents are there. We've done a fair amount of good work. We are able to refit our ships. We are able to repair our aircraft in India. Licensed production of aircraft takes place in HAL and all. That's manufacturing TOT. That's not TOT. TOT should be, if you ask me in layman terms, with my TOT, I should not only be able to make that particular equipment, I should be able thereafter to continue making better versions of that equipment without having to go back to the foreign OEM. That means I've absorbed that technology totally. That is where the catch lies. No country is going to give you its cutting edge technology, its first generation technology. It will give you technology, but it will give you little older technology if it does. So we have to make that investment in our own R&D establishment, in our own labs. We've got a huge organization called CSIR. We've got a huge organization called DRDO. We've got universities which are doing cutting edge research, academia, but we've not been able to put all of them together into an all of national effort in R&D. Everyone's doing the little penny pockets of work. If we can do that, it'll greatly benefit us. Secondly, this whole L1 culture, the lowest bid wins. Technology doesn't come cheap. Why is military equipment expensive? It's not because the metal is expensive or the component is expensive. It's because the intellectual property is expensive. That guy spent billions of dollars doing R&D to develop a technology. He's not going to hand it over to you in an L1 bid. So we've got to understand that. And we have to, therefore, instead of having an L1 system, probably have a weighted matrix in which technology plays a very important role. So cost is also a factor. Obviously, we are not a rich country. We can only pay that much and no more. But we must weigh that carefully against what kind of technology we're getting. So if, let's say, for example, I'm offering you a missile for 100 rupees, and somebody else comes and tells me I can offer you a missile that is 25% better than what you're getting for 100 rupees, but only 10% more expensive. I should be able to take that. But here I am constrained by L1. So I'm saying, I'm sorry, I know you got a fantastic missile, but just because you're giving me 25% more capability, but just because you're 10% more expensive, I can't take it from you. I have to take this older version, who's giving it to me for the basic RFP requirement. So higher technology availability does not translate into, does not help. These are the things we have to look at very carefully. And I'll be a little blunt. The reasons for that are not far to seek for this L1. Don't forget that the armed forces only provide the technical advice. So they are, as far up to the procedure which I outlined to you, up to the end of the trials, the armed forces are doing everything. Part of the staff evaluation is done by the armed forces. After that, file goes to the MOD. They are seeing the cost and the contractual issues and all that. But so what to that bureaucrat, who's a civilian bureaucrat in the MOD, who has no military experience, who has never handled military equipment, doesn't understand military technology, what would he sort of look at to decide on an equipment? How does he feel confident what I'm choosing is best because I'm choosing the cheapest? So I'm not, as a bureaucrat, if suppose a technical guy came and told him, but this is better, he said, anyway, I'm going to play safe. Sasta hai, to isme koi ghapla nahi hoega, if I choose L1. So that sort of environment needs to be changed. And this comes out of the insecurity of the bureaucrat because he feels safest when it's cheapest. So nobody's going to point a finger at him, or he doesn't have to answer any awkward questions. That is fundamentally the problem. So the armed forces have to become an integral part of the decision-making process in the MOD, and not just technical advisors or technical support or technical inputs. They have to be on part of the actual decision-making. Why this equipment is to be taken vis-a-vis another equipment, even if it is not the cheapest. Is it worth it? That we pay a little extra for getting much better technology. So bottom line, technology does not come cheap. You want cutting edge technology, you should be willing to pay for it or develop your own, which will be a slower process. A third thing that can be done, which unfortunately is not happening. See, foreign OEMs have understood one thing, that India is focused on going indigenous. Okay. So this buy global concept that we had, that you can just go buy equipment and bring it with no transfer of technology, no offsets, nothing, is going to be something of the past another 5 or 7 years. If foreign OEMs still want to be relevant in India after 5, 7, 10 years, whatever it may take, they have to become a part of the Indian defense manufacturing, military industrial complex, right? Either they set up their own manufacturing facilities in India, or they have joint ventures or some sort of mechanism by which their technology and their expertise comes into made in India equipment. The equipment is made in India by an Indian company or whosoever it might be. So, and that is not only, so technology will come in that way. So DRDO should go out and say, okay, I need, let's say, a heavyweight torpedo. I have the technology for a torpedo, but I don't have a technology for a current generation torpedo. I have a technology for what the West was probably using 15 years ago. So what do I need to do? I need to improve my homing head. I need to improve my whatever it might be, my control surfaces. So why do not, and this OEM does fantastic work in torpedoes. Is he willing to co-develop and co-produce with me? Co-develop is a very important thing, not just co-produce, co-develop. Now, that foreign company will say, if I were to co-develop a torpedo with the DRDO in India, that means I'll be, in some way, I will also be part of the entire torpedo story of the Made in India torpedo for many years to come. In through whichever mechanism, maybe licensing, maybe royalty, maybe whatever. So it's attractive for him also. So these are the innovative things now that we have to look at. We just can't go by the old system. We have to start looking outward. We have to start seeing what we can do. Indian industry has to understand, Indian R&D establishment has to understand that they have to put in that effort. It's not going to just, they can't just walk out and come back with something with a box and say, oh, here's made in India now, because I changed the label on this and it's become made in India. Those days are gone. It used to happen in many things, many places we've heard of this happening, that, it's basically the foreign technology, but with minor, a little tweak here, a little tweak there, it becomes indigenous. That's not going to happen. So if you want to really be a force to reckon with in the indigenous in the manufacture, you have to get into the co-development stage with foreign OEMs. And not just co-production, or you give me 5 of these and I'll reverse engineer the rest. That won't happen. The West is not going to give you something out of their high-end technology for you to reverse engineer.
If I may remember, I think this happened with the Tata trucks, right? The label change and all that.
Yeah, I don't know the details, but
there was a huge scandal that came up, I think 2011 or something.
Yeah, those things keep happening.
Yeah. So, you mentioned co-development. Would you call BrahMos, which is supposed to be a co-development between India and Russia, as a prime example for something like that?
Absolutely. And look how successful that model has been. I remember in 2001, when it was still sort of in its earlier stages, Dr. Pillai, who was actually the father of the BrahMos program, he came and spoke to us at the Naval High Command course. And we were fascinated by how we've gone about it. We were not claiming in 2001 that we've got this missile. We knew that we need Russian help. But today, it is considered more an Indian missile than a Russian missile. Over 20 years. And look how versatile it is. It's being used from land. It's being used by airborne platforms. It's being used by naval platforms. It will soon be used by submarine platforms. Look how versatile the thing is. We didn't have to go to 5 different people all over the world and say, you give me a missile which I can fire from land. You give me a missile which I can fire from my ships. Now you've got one missile. So look at the economies of scale. Instead of buying 300 missiles of 5 different types from 5 different OEMs, you've got about 1,500 missiles you can build of one kind with configured for various platforms. So this is the sort of thing we should be looking at. For example, helicopters, let's say, hypothetically. There's a huge requirement of helicopters by all the 3 services. So why are we not setting up a helicopter building plant in India, which can focus on helicopters? Why are we not going to one OEM abroad and saying, okay, look, this is my requirement of helicopters. Can you support this entire thing? And what are the economies of scale you can give me on this? I need a light helicopter. I need a heavy helicopter. I need this. I'm not saying it will work. I'm just giving a very simple, it's a very simplistic thing that I'm saying. But these are the sort of things you've got to start looking at now. And that is where the joint planning is proving beneficial. Instead of the Army and the Air Force and Navy going to separately projecting the requirements, at least is now all discussed together in an LTIPP, saying that, okay, everyone needs a rifle. How many rifles do we need for the Indian Armed Forces? Not Indian Army or Indian Navy or Indian Air Force separately. How many do we need for the Indian Armed Forces? So automatically, the whole system starts sort of responding.
I'm sure so. Radical changes, but things do take a little time for them to.
They will take time.
Yeah.
So long as the thought process is that we need to do it, it will happen by and by. Everyone has to be on the same page as far as the requirement goes and the understanding that it's so critical.
I'd like to kind of take your attention to Defense Ordinance Boards. There was restructuring of them that has happened. Are you satisfied with what has happened at a predominantly? Of course, dreams are something which are, all of us will have big dreams. But at the moment, looking at the history, the current and the future prospects of it, you think we're in the right direction? What more would you want to do, sir?
Yeah, I think we're in the right direction. The Ordnance Factory Board was a relic of a different era altogether. I mean, the MOD also acknowledged that the Ordnance Factory Board is not performing with its 40-odd factories that it had. And, all kinds of things they were supposed to be manufacturing, which was substandard, suboptimal, etc., etc., etc. So what has now been done is that the Ordnance Factory Board has been disbanded. All those 40-odd factories have now been converted into 7 clusters. Each cluster is now a DPSU by itself, Defense Public Sector Undertaking by itself. It's not part of some board. It's going to be a more corporatized structure now. So that's the good part. And hopefully with that, more the efficiencies will come in, and the economies of scale will come in, etc., etc. That's the good part. What has not been done is, or what could not be done is the fact that it's the same workforce with the same mindset. And the Minister of State for Defense in Parliament made a very categorical statement that their perks and privileges, central government perks and privileges, will be protected. So now, what is the motivation for him to improve working? He'll say life goes on as usual. His job is still safe. He's not going to be thrown out. So obviously, I'm not saying that should be done. Government has its own way of working. So it is a promising start. Now we have to see how well it delivers. Because even now it's only become a DPSU. It's not become a private corporation. It's still part of the Ministry of Defense structure. But the very fact that this step was taken means at least they acknowledge that there was a problem. And so once you acknowledge there's a problem, then you find ways and means of solving it. So that was the good part.
Indeed.
So hopefully that they will deliver on the promise that that has been generated by this conversion into 7 DPSU clusters. And perhaps over a time it will get streamlined, more and more streamlined, and they'll be able to separate the wheat from the chaff over a period of time.
Sure, sir.
But I think it's a very positive step. Yeah.
A lot of people, termed it as a powder keg actually, but thankfully things kind of smooth sailed into.
No, they did. But the unions did threaten to strike. They had to be. Parliament had to give a legislative order that they're not allowed to strike work. So that is all part of the that's how it works, the whole system. So
it didn't explode. This is what I'm trying.
Well handled by and large.
Yeah. Sir, talking about defense exports, you mentioned the line about the BrahMos to the Philippines. We also know that the Tejas is pretty much in the front line of selection in terms of the Malaysian Air Force. As per the information in the public domain, I may stand completely wrong officially. We also know Vietnam is looking at the BrahMos. There's a lot which is happening in the Southeast Asia, as a matter of fact, with India. What do you think we need to do in terms of pushing this thing forward? Because one of the challenges that I, as a layman, can see is going to be the production. For example, if we are not able to produce more than 18 aircraft of Tejas for our own Air Force, how are we going to deliver abroad? So these are the questions which a layman has. How do you look at it?
You're right. That is a challenge. Capacity is a challenge. We have capacity constraints. Our shipyards are capacity constraint. Our aeronautical, because HAL is we only have one aircraft manufacturer actually in the country. He makes everything, the helicopters, the planes, everything. So obviously he will be constrained by capacity. And if we have to really push exports, we should have the capacity to be able to deliver. There's no point going to an export market and saying, yes, we'd like to sell you something, but we don't have enough of it. So we obviously can't do that. But BrahMos has been a very promising thing. It's a fantastic weapon. Many countries have expressed interest. And I think we must focus on the Southeast Asian market, because more than the weapon per se, it is the economic, the military, and the political leverage that you get in a region. And for a country that is seeking to expand its sphere of influence, it's very important that this should include military diplomacy and military exports. You see China, or you see any of these other countries. Now China has been given 2 submarines to Bangladesh, and now 1 submarine to Myanmar. So the very fact that there are 3 Chinese origin submarines operating in the Bay of Bengal is cause for concern. These are navies which they don't threaten Indian Navy in any way. But the Chinese are now got a foothold in the Bay of Bengal because they'll provide service and support to these submarines. Their engineers will come and work in these shipyards where these submarines are. Tomorrow they could create, let's say, a repair facility for these submarines, which their own submarines could use when they operate in the Bay of Bengal. So all those factors. China hasn't given Myanmar 1 submarine to go and defeat the Indian Navy. It's given it to get a foothold in that country for submarine technology, and for its own submarines to come and get the support. Or it's building a submarine base for the Bangladesh Navy, BNS Sheikh Hasina of Cox's Bazar. So, while it's very nice, Bangladesh has 2 old Ming class submarines, and they're building a whole submarine base. It's going to be used for other things also. So it could well be a staging post for Chinese submarines operating in the Bay of Bengal at a later date. So military leverage, military exports provide that. It's a valuable source of revenue. It supports your own defense industry. So it's a very important element. And it's sad that we've not been able to sort of achieve much so far. We very proudly say that, well, we are in the top 25 defense exporting nations of the world. But our actual share of defense exports is 0.2% of the world's total defense exports at the moment. Hopefully, this will improve as we go along. And we've also been very inward-looking for many years. It's not really that India has been basically inward-looking, defensive foreign policy. No, we are the good guys. How can we give defense equipment to somebody outside? So we have to come out of that mindset. I'm glad now that realpolitik is playing in a bit. In the Russia-Ukraine thing, we've seen how India's reacted to the whole thing. Notwithstanding whatever the world has said, we said our own national interest comes first. So our reaction to this whole conflict is going to be something that is not detrimental to our national interest. It doesn't matter whether you don't like it or you like it. So that's important. That's the kind of thinking foreign policy must do across the board.
Step in the right direction indeed, sir, and especially with the statements that are being put out against the biggest adversary that we've got, China, is something which is a refreshing change that we see within our politic and within our foreign affairs, sir. Leaving that aside, sir, my question to you, which is the last and final one, a lot of, and I say this with a huge amount of respect for a lot of people who analyze defense, but a lot of them wrongly attribute Indian technology as inferior when matched with similar technology from abroad just because it comes from abroad. Now, it may be inferior on certain aspects, fair enough, but at the same level, the statement that just because it's made in India is inferior, is that fair to put across?
No, I wouldn't say that. See, one can't leapfrog the technology curve easily. You have to climb up the technology curve. How smartly you do it is a different matter, but you have to come up. So if you're a generation behind, it will take a lot of effort for us to catch up with the generation ahead. We are constrained. Look, let's face it, we are constrained with our R&D. We have a constraint on our budgets. We can't afford to invest the kind of money the US does in R&D. So obviously we will never be able to achieve that level of cutting edge technology. But there's so much good work happening now. You see in certain unmanned technologies, in certain disruptive areas. The Industrial Revolution 2.0 and 3.0 was all about physical manufacturing capability. Technology was, fancy machines, CNC machines, all kinds of stuff, precision engineering. Obviously, we couldn't keep pace with the West in that because financially we couldn't afford that kind of investment, which they could. But in Industrial Revolution 4.0 is all about the brain. It's about artificial intelligence. It's about, disruptive technologies. There, the Indian brain is going to compete with the Western brain more than physical, things on ground. There, I don't think we are inferior in any way. I think we are probably ahead of the curve, so long as we can back it up with proper application. I think we should be able to do a great job there. So I don't think we're inferior. Yes, we have sort of lagged behind. And at the moment, our effort should be to not lag further behind. At least maintain that gap. And that is why I'm very, very. I always emphasize this aspect of code development. Otherwise you'll always be a generation behind. So I give you an example of a torpedo. Now, if I'm going to develop this torpedo myself, yes, perhaps I don't have the expertise to make a motor as well as, let's say, the US makes or Germans make or somebody makes. So my motor's just that wee bit not as good, right? Not as I wouldn't say not as good, not of the same caliber yet. So if that torpedo is giving 50 knots, my torpedo might give 40 knots, let's say. But I also want a torpedo which is 50 knots because I'll be pitted against an enemy who has a torpedo which fires at 50 knots. So co-develop. Tell that guy, come, share your technology with me. Let's make India our production hub. And that is what, if you remember, Prime Minister Modi never said make in India, every nut and bolt is being made in India. He said, come to India and make for the world. He wanted India to be the production hub for foreign technology to come in, make India a manufacturing powerhouse, and at our cheaper prices be able to export to our part of the world who cannot afford expensive European and Western equipment. That was the bottom line, actually. It wasn't all about that we will do everything ourselves. It was interpreted differently. So
Absolutely.
if we can do that, and that is why if you see over a period of time now, up to 74% FDI is permitted in defense. That's so that to encourage foreign companies to come in India and start manufacturing in India. Set up, like some of these big defense companies have got fabulous R&D setups, engineering setups in the south of India. They made that investment. So, but like I said, it's all got to be done. It's got to be done smartly. It's got to be done. There has to be a will to do it. There has to be an enabling environment created for it, and it will happen. After all, India is the biggest defense market in the world. Why should it not be attractive to foreign OEMs if you can create the right enabling environment? Every foreign OEM should want to actually come to India and do business in India. There's no bigger market than defense market in the world at the moment other than India. So I think there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of scope.
Yeah.
We can leapfrog this technology curve by smartly cooperating and working with foreign industry, where at the end of the day, we are the ones who benefit. So it is possible.
Self-interest, coming back to the same thing, sir.
Bottom line.
I think
national interest. Maybe not just self-interest, it's a national interest.
India's national interest. I think this is one thing that is being driven home by the crisis which is unfolding in Ukraine. We are currently realizing to probably not, something that we wanted to realize with a jerk, but we are realizing, we are going to be alone in the world when crisis is going to hit upon us. And it is our own systems, our own technology, our own development, our own production that will actually take us forward into what we want to do. Because no matter how bad the situation in Ukraine would be, and I'm not wanting to get into that entire thing, India is not wanting to, if I may use that word, take a hard stand on any aggression that is actually taking place. Statements are there and this and that, but it's also a balance that India is trying to create within itself. And this wouldn't be the case no matter what the relationship with the aggressor or the adversary or whatever it may be. This wouldn't be the case if we don't have that many strings attached with any particular country. And it's something that I wanted to talk to you about, sir, and thank you so much for taking us through this, because it's not an easy subject to understand. As a matter of fact, just the reference of a 600-page book kind of puts a lot of people at the back foot that, it's that difficult to get fire. And defense technology normally is. We saw the whole controversy with the Rafales, and we saw a whole lot of things after that as well. So it's not something that everybody does understand. It's a whole lot of things that develop as time go forward. So once again, thank you so much. It's going to be an eye-opener for us to understand this whole defense procurement. Before we actually go into specifics in the future, as and when things unfold, it'll be nice to actually have your perspective on those things in the future as well, sir. Till then, for the next time, sir, Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Aadi. Always a pleasure as always. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, sir.